Good morning, everyone. Today is October 14th, 2019, and here is today's Monday Morning Minute. For today, as usual, we will recap last week's readings about increasing student motivation to learn. I'll then talk about our readings this week. We have our Emmer and Evertson chapters 7 and 8. And then I'll end by discussing a few upcoming assignments. We have a critical response number 7 due this week, and then we have our classroom culture toolkit due October 27th. So, thinking back to last week when we read a couple chapters about increasing student motivation, I pulled some interesting ideas that I wanted to share with you all, starting with Rachel, who writes, "If we can align students' interests with their learning goals, we can avoid rebellion and resentment." That seems like a good investment of my time as a classroom teacher. As a therapist, I can see that I can help in this process by working with students to identify their interests. I can assist students in exploring new interests and by practicing and modeling self-advocacy. If students know what they are interested in and can ask for what they want in a respectful way, I believe teachers would be more willing to allow and encourage their learning. Rachel, thanks so much for calling our attention to the importance of that self-advocacy piece that was discussed. And I appreciate once again that we're kind of bringing in the multiple hats that we wear beyond this class to bear when we're actually reading through and analyzing the reading. So thanks so much. And Joe is responding specifically to one of the student academic needs laid out in the text, specifically understanding and valuing learning goals. And Joe writes, "To me, this is really the foundation to the entire learning process. If the student fail to understand and or value the learning goals, there really is no way for any effective learning to be taking place. As teachers, if we are able to not only communicate to our students what the learning goal of a given unit is, but also to instill a sense of value in that learning goal, I believe we are much more likely to actually get the students to buy into and absorb what we are attempting to teach them." And again, this is so important and a piece that in my time in classrooms, I very rarely see happening in action. My old principal, when I was teaching in Hawaii, I was teaching 7th and 8th grade. He really kind of delighted in going into classrooms, tapping students on the shoulder just kind of randomly and asking them, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And how will you know if you're doing this well?" And so that's always kind of been my litmus test. If I were to ask one of your students randomly what they're doing on any given day, why they're doing it, and how they will know if they're doing it well, how many of your students do you think would actually be able to answer that question? And Joe is pointing here to the importance of ensuring that we lead our instruction kind of with these learning goals and values in mind. So thanks so much, Joe, for calling our attention to that. So this week, we are looking at two chapters from the Emmer and Evertson textbook, having to do very broadly with managing through engaging instruction and also participant structures. So in chapter 7, the focus is mainly planning and conducting instruction. That's the title of the chapter. And they introduce some really seminal research here by Koonin and his team. These came to be known as Koonin's concepts for managing group instruction. So any kind of group, whether it's only a few students or whether it's a whole big class. And so a few of them, I've just kind of listed them here. But again, these are really foundational to a lot of classroom management research. The idea of with itness, overlapping momentum, smoothness, group alerting, accountability, and higher participation formats. All of those are described in detail in this chapter, as well as they have some examples that are specifically provided. And again, I think that's kind of a good starting place. And these concepts, some of them are really intuitive, but again, that's just kind of a helpful starting place for us as we're thinking about the power of instruction in managing a classroom. This chapter also discusses more briefly transition management, so changing between instructional activities. That's a prime time where instructional time and focus is lost. So how do we manage transitions in ways to maximize learning, to kind of ensure that this smoothness concept that Koonin is talking about is actually happening? And then finally, the last piece is instructional management. So ensuring that our lessons are engaging and exciting, that they move at a good, steady clip. And again, I love that this is included as a component of classroom management, ensuring that what we're teaching is interesting to students and that we put the time into our planning just to make sure that other behaviors won't necessarily be a major problem. So some of us I know are not in a classroom context, and so that may not be as relevant. But still, again, I think it's just an important kind of reflection piece. So in chapter 8, we have the title. It's Managing Cooperative Learning Groups. And so I think a couple of points are really interesting here. This entire chapter, as it's stated, is about cooperative learning groups. And these groups are merely one effective instructional technique. And I think that we in schools generally could stand to do a lot more of these cooperative learning groups. But again, it is just one instructional technique of a plethora that we can and should use in our classrooms. Emmer and Evertson talk a lot about the benefits of these cooperative learning groups. One that I thought was particularly interesting was that when we are structuring our groups in a heterogeneous way, it's actually beneficial for all students involved. And they mention some research about how lower achieving students in those groups profit from their peers' explanations, while the high achievers also benefit because they are having to do the cognitive work of constructing explanations for their fellow students. And most importantly, I think in this chapter 8, they point out that our students will need explicit instruction in order to be effective in these cooperative learning groups. Oftentimes, we might just kind of put students in groups and expect that they will know what collaboration looks like, what leadership looks like, what explaining looks like, and that is often not the case. So they mention and they give some really great tips about how to actually directly instruct students into performing the behaviors that we think of, again, as like collaboration and cooperation and leadership, etc. So just kind of remember that and pay particular attention to their suggestions. So for this week, we have our 7th critical response. Our initial post will be due on Thursday, and 2 follow-ups, as usual, will be due on Sunday. And I'm giving you an optional prompt this week if you'd like. There is a case study. It's at the end of chapter 7. It's case study 7.3 on page 142. And it details the case of Miss Jackson. So again, if you'd like, go ahead and read through this case. It's very brief. And then identify the core issues in this case study. And then also how concepts and strategies laid out in both of our chapters 7 and 8, might help Miss Jackson kind of sort through the issue that she's having. Again, that's an optional prompt. If you'd rather just kind of pick and choose the most interesting parts for you personally and reflect and synthesize those, that is totally fine. And then a few other notes. So this is not technically an assignment, though I would really appreciate your cooperation and help in filling it out. I have constructed a brief, certainly less than 5 minutes, maybe more like 2-minute long survey for you all to complete. I've called it the mid-semester feedback form, and I'm going to include a link to this form. It's just a Google form in our announcement for today. So you can just find that link again as part of this announcement. And I just really want to know what you all are thinking of the course so far. What is working for you? What's not working for you? What can we change going forward for the second half of this semester? This is the first time I've taught this course in this format, this online format, so your feedback is really invaluable to me. And then again, just a general reminder that our second big assignment, our Classroom Culture Toolkit, is due Sunday, October 27th. I talked about it a few weeks ago. I went over it, and I plan to say a little bit more next week as well, but this will likely take a little while to complete, hence, the fact that it's a bigger assignment, a major assignment. So if you haven't looked at that, if you haven't kind of peeked around in our assignment folder on Blackboard, please take some time to just go ahead and look at that. And of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I wish you all the very best week possible, and I'll see you back here next Monday.